Okay. All right, so now we're going to do domain and range, but instead of off of a graph or something like that, we're going to do real life word problems. Okay, so the total cost in dollars to buy uniforms for the soccer team players can be found using the function, and it gives me the equation, where X is the number of uniforms purchased, so that's important. There is a minimum of 16 players and a maximum of 20. What is the domain of the function and what is the range? Okay, so first of all, it tells me that X is the number of uniforms. Remember that X is domain. So let's talk about that domain. What can it be? All right, so we had some restrictions. It told me the minimum players can be 16, so I know that's the lowest number of uniforms I can get. The highest I can get is 20, but everything between that is okay, so I'm going to list 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, because I know I can have 16 players, 17, 18, 19, or 20 players. Okay, this is what you call a discrete problem. Discrete means that you can't have part of a uniform. So I can't have 16.5. So some people might think you should write it like this. Don't write this down, guys. We can have anywhere between 16 and 20 uniforms, but this one will not work because 18.5 is between those two numbers, but you can't purchase 18.5 uniforms. So that's why we don't write it this way. It's going to be written this way. That's discrete. Okay, so let's talk about range. Range is y. And if we look at this equation up here, if x is the number of uniforms, y is going to be the cost. So now what I need to do is I need to figure out what would the cost be if I buy each of these uniforms, and I'm going to write that in a list. Okay, I could plug in, or on this one to be faster, I'm going to use my graphing calculator. Well, for now, while that's loading, I'll just use my calculator here. And I'm going to graph the equation it gave me. So the equation it gave me is 28.95x plus 4.25. Okay, so this is what it looks like. All right, well, it's kind of blurry, but all right, so from here, what I want to do is I want to open my table. So to open the table, I'm going to press Control T. I know you don't have a calculator at home. Okay, so when I press Control T, it's going to give me a list of all the values, right? So if I bought one uniform, this is what it would cost me. Okay, so we said we have a minimum of 16, so I'm going to scroll down to 16. Okay, blurry focus. All right, so this is what it would cost me if I had 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20 players. So those are all the different amounts that we could spend depending on the number of players we had. So I know it's hard to see these guys, and I'll write it down on the paper in just a second, but I'm going to write these values down in a list. So if I had 16 uniforms, it would cost me $467.45. Now I'm going to list for 17. 18. I'm going to continue underneath because I'm running out of space. And then finally 20. So this is the cost if I would get 16, 17, 18, 19, or 20. Okay, the final cost in dollars to buy robotic kits for the science club can be found using, and it gives me the function, where N is the number of kits purchased. They want to purchase at least 8, but not more than 12. what is the domain, what is the range? Well, I know this is a discrete problem because they're buying kits and you can't get a part of a kit. Okay, so they don't use X and Y in this case. Instead of using an X, they used an N, and that's okay. And it tells me that N is the number of kits. They don't use a Y in this case. They use a C, and C is going to be the cost. So this is very similar to the last one. So we're going to have to put a list for our domain since you can't have a part of a kit. The lowest number of kits they can get is 8 and a maximum of 12, so I need to list every number between 8 and 12. Okay, range is my cost. So now I need to put a list of what it would cost me if I would buy each of these number of kits. Okay, I think my calculator came up on here so we can see it better. Okay, so make this a little bigger. All right, so I'm going to go graph it. And the equation said 49.85, and I can't type an N, so I'm going to change it to X, plus 7.95. All right, so I'm going to graph it. Now I want to look at my list of tables, so I can press Control T. The lowest number is 8 kits, so I'm going to scroll down. I want 8 to 12. Okay, so here's 8 all the way to 12, so I'm going to list these prices. Oops, let me write it down first. And finally, 606.15. All right, so there it is. So those are the different amounts we might have to pay depending if we buy each of those number of kits. Okay, she's charging her siblings to wrap their Christmas gifts, and it gives me the function. It says represent the amount of money, or it represents the amount of money in dollars she will earn for wrapping X presents. She only has enough wrapping to do 7 gifts. It wants to know the domain and the range. Okay, so remember domain is X. And it said X was presents. So that's the domain. And I know this is discrete as well. I'm going to have to make a list because you can't wrap a part of a present. So the lowest she can do is 0 if nobody wants her to take her business, right? The highest she can do is 7. So I need to list all the numbers in between. I know Y is going to be how much money she makes. And this will be the range. So if she wraps 0 presents, she's going to get $0. It says 3 times X, so she's charging $3 for each present she wraps. So if she wraps 1 present, she's going to get $3. She wraps 2, she's going to get 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, and then finally if she wraps all 7, she's going to get a total of $21. You could have done the same thing, but it was pretty fast to just multiply by 3. So if you wanted to, you could graph it and open the table and you would have got these exact numbers. Okay, now we're going to move on to continuous problems where you can have a part of something. So like whereas you couldn't have a part of a kit, these parts will be okay. So continuous. So when we write our domain and range, it's going to look a little bit different. It says when driving for Uber, there's a base fare of 2. That's the flat fee that you were charged at the beginning of the ride. Suppose the function, it gives me the formula, represents the price of the ride, where x is the number of miles driven. Find the domain and range. Okay, so domain is x, and x tells me it stands for number of miles. Okay, so we do have a condition. It's asking me to find the domain in range for up to 10 miles. So I do have a maximum point. So the lowest I can go is 0 miles. The highest I can go is 10 miles. You can drive part of a mile, like half of a mile, a quarter of a mile. So in this case, I'm not going to list individual miles. I'm going to use my between symbols, right? And we use a less than because we always start with a small number. Okay, from here, it can be equal to 0 and it can be equal to the full 10 miles. So this is how you write it. We can drive anywhere between 0 to 10 miles. All right, for range, that's y. It's going to be the cost of our trip. So in order to do this one, I'm going to put a y in the middle. And now I have to figure out if it cost me, if I drive 0 miles, what would the cost be? So that would be 2 because that base fee, so watch this, if I plug in. So before I even drive anywhere, $2 to get in the cab to use it, right? All right, so now let's go to the max. I know the farthest I can go is 10. So I know the most it's going to cost me is at $6. All right, so I know it can cost me anywhere between $2 and $6. Okay, it can be equal to 2, which that would be kind of silly to get in the cab and not go anywhere. But if I drive the full 10 miles, it can equal the 6. Okay, so we're going to rent bikes for $8 an hour. The total cost C for renting is in hours and H hours and given by the function C equals 8H. Once you get to the rental shop, you figure you can rent a bike for at most 5 hours. What is the domain in the range for this situation? So domain is usually X, but instead of X, they use an H, and it's going to stand for hours. Okay, time is continuous because you can have part of an hour. So the lowest amount of time we can use it is 0, and we know the most we can use it is 5. Since it's continuous, I want to use my between symbols, right? Always less than because we start with a small number. I could use the bike for 0 hours, or I could use it for the full 5. All right, so that's my domain. Now I need to figure out my range, which is typically y, but instead of a y, they used a c, which stands for the cost. So range is y, so we're going to have a y in the middle, right? Now, if it costs, if I use it for 0 hours, what is the cost? So I'm going to use the formula. So 8 times h, so 8 times 0 be 0. If I use it for the full 5 hours, 8 times 5 is. So it can cost me anywhere from $0 to $40. If you don't use it at all, 0 equal to 0. If I use it for the full 5, it could equal 40. So if I use it from 0 to 5 hours, it's going to cost me anywhere from $0 to $40. Okay, so he has a summer job that pays $7 an hour, and he worked between 15 and 35 hours every week. His salary can be modeled by the equation S equals 7H, where S is his weekly salary and H is the number of hours. What is the domain and range? All right, so domain is typically X, but instead of an X, they used H, which stands for hours. Okay, it did give me some conditions on this. It tells me between 15 and 35. So it's going to start at 15, go to 35. It's talking about hours. You can have a part of an hour. So we want X to be anywhere between those. It could equal 15. It could equal 35. So our domain is talking, he could work anywhere from 15 to 35 hours. So now let's find our range, which is typically Y, but instead they used an S, which stands for his weekly salary. So here's my Y. So if he works from 15 to 35, let's figure out how much is he going to make. Well, the lowest he can make is if he works the 15 hours. So I'm going to have 7 times H, so 7 times 15. And then the max, sorry, and the max he's going to get is 35. So I'm going to have 7 times 35. So 7 times 15 is 105. So that's going to go in that first place. If he works the full 35, he's going to get 245. So I know he can get anywhere between 105 and 245. If he works only 15, I know it's going to be equal to 105. If he works the 35, it's going to be equal to 245. So if he works anywhere from 15 to 35 hours, he's going to make anywhere from $105 to $245. All right, and that's it. Later, guys.